I'm just a grandmother. A woman who once thought she would die in silence beneath a creaky wooden floor in a room that didn't even deserve to be called a basement. It wasn't always like this. I used to be someone's everything, his wife, their mother, the glue that held everything together. I spent my life making soup on cold days, sewing hems, packing lunches, cleaning floors that were dirtied again within hours. But one day, they stopped seeing me. And then they made me disappear. It was a Tuesday. Funny how trauma always starts on ordinary days. I had just finished folding the laundry when my daughter-in-law called me into the kitchen. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the kind that makes your stomach turn because it's never sincere. "Can you just help me with something downstairs?" she asked. Of course I followed. That's what I did. Followed, obeyed, helped. What else are old women good for, right? We walked down the basement stairs, rickety things I'd warned them to fix 100 times. She told me to grab something from behind the water heater. And when I turned around, she was gone. And the door at the top of the stairs, it slammed shut. At first I laughed, thought it was a joke. "Julie," I called up. "Very funny. Now let me out." No answer. Just silence. I knocked, banged, yelled. Nothing. Hours passed. My legs ached. My throat burned. I sat on the cold concrete floor wrapped in an old curtain I'd found in a plastic bin. And slowly a thought crept in, a thought so terrifying I rejected it at first. What if they meant to leave me down here? Not for minutes, not for hours, but for good. That night, the light in the stairwell turned off. The darkness swallowed me whole. I cried not because I was scared of the dark, but because I finally realized I wasn't just invisible. I was disposable. There was no bathroom. No real bed, just boxes and spiders and the smell of mildew and long-forgotten holidays. They left food sometimes. Scraps really stale bread, a bruised apple, an old granola bar. They slid it through a doggy door someone had rigged into the base of the stairwell, like I was an animal. No, not even an animal. A secret. Why that question kept me alive for the first few days. Why would they do this? Was it the inheritance? Was I too much trouble? Was I a burden now that I wasn't babysitting, cooking, scrubbing? Was I in the way? The days blended into nights. The cold seeped into my bones. But I didn't die. And I didn't go mad. Not yet. Because I held on to one thing, a whisper in my soul that said, "You will not let this be the end of your story." And that's when something shifted. Something inside me woke up. I stopped counting the hours. Stopped crying. Started watching. Every footstep. Every creak, every shift in the light under the door. I began to track them, like prey learning her captor's patterns. I listened, I memorized, I planned, because one day that door would open. And when it did, they would wish they had left me in peace. But I'm not here to be vengeful. I'm here to tell you this. Never underestimate a woman who's been locked away. She doesn't break. She sharpens. You might be wondering how it got this bad. How does a woman end up locked in a basement by the people she once held in her arms? People she fed with trembling hands when they were too little to even say thank you. Let me take you back. Not to the moment they shut the door, but to the years leading up to it, because no betrayal starts all at once. It grows slowly like mold behind wallpaper. His name was Mark, my only son, born with bright blue eyes and a cry that shook the windows. He used to wrap his tiny fingers around mine and call me his forever. And I believed him. I raised him mostly alone. His father, God rest him, died young. Heart attack at 42. Left me a widow and left Mark with a hole in his chest that I tried to fill with everything I had. I worked nights at the diner, days cleaning houses, spent more time with bleach and mop buckets than my own pillow. But I never complained, because he was my boy, and a mother does what she must. When Mark met Julie, I tried to be happy. She was younger, smarter, louder. There was something cold behind her eyes, though something calculating. But Mark loved her, so I bit my tongue. The first time she corrected me in front of the kids, I laughed it off. The second time, I lowered my eyes. By the fifth, I started to wonder, when did I become their maid, not their mother? They moved me in after I broke my hip. Said it was the right thing to do. I had my own room, but no peace. Julie said I was too noisy, too slow, too forgetful. Sometimes she'd whisper under her breath when I passed by. We're doing her a favor. She's lucky we haven't put her in a home. The kids started ignoring me. No more bedtime stories. No more shared laughs. I became the woman in the background. Good for folding, for fixing, for fading away. And Mark, he just looked away. When Julie snapped at me, when she accidentally forgot to bring me lunch, when she talked about getting her hands on the will, he just looked away. I stayed because I had nowhere else. No retirement fund, no second home, no safety net. Only the people I'd poured my life into. And somehow that life had dried up without anyone noticing I was still thirsty. There were signs, you know, little things, locks on the basement door I didn't remember being there before. Julie moving boxes downstairs for storage. Mark glancing at me like I was a stack of unpaid bills. I just didn't want to see it, didn't want to believe they were capable of more than unkindness. I thought maybe they were tired. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I deserved it. But then came that Tuesday. The curtain call on the illusion. When they locked the door, and the truth came flooding in like cold water. I wasn't family anymore. I was an inconvenience. So when people say, how could they do such a thing? I don't answer right away. Because the truth is it didn't start in that basement. It started the day they stopped seeing me as a mother, and started seeing me as a burden. But I wasn't done yet. Because what they didn't know, what no one saw, was that I was still watching, still listening. And deep down, I was still the same woman who once held a broken family together on nothing but grit and grace. And now I had nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerous. People think being locked up means stillness, but it's not quiet. It's never quiet. Not when every sound could mean something. A footstep, a whisper, a dropped plate upstairs. When you're in the basement, silence isn't peaceful. It's a weapon. It's the sound of people pretending you're not alive. I learned the rhythm of their lives from under that floor. Morning, the coffee maker gurgling. Julie pacing her heels always clicked twice as fast when she was annoyed. Mark's cough as he scrolled his phone at the kitchen table. The slam of the front door when he left for work. That was when I knew she was alone. Her footsteps slowed. She made her calls usually to her sister, sometimes a lawyer. She's still here. Can you believe it? No, we haven't updated the paperwork yet, but she doesn't have anywhere else. There it was. The confirmation. They were waiting for me to get sicker. To die down there. To quietly disappear without a trace, like mold under the stairs. I stopped begging at the door. It only gave them power. Instead, I watched, listened, memorized. Julie didn't go downstairs unless Mark was home. They never spoke of me around the children. It was like I had died, and they were teaching the kids to forget. I scratched tally marks into a cardboard box to count the days. 1, 2, 10, 27. The food stayed the same, barely enough. But I noticed something strange. The light bulb in the stairwell had a timer. It clicked on at 6:30 p.m., stayed lit for 30 minutes, every night, which meant it wasn't random. Someone had set it, someone who assumed I wouldn't notice. But I did. Because when you have nothing left but your senses, you sharpen them. I began to plan. Not a dramatic escape. I wasn't a spy in a movie. But something real, a way to get out or get seen. The vent. There was a small old air vent near the ceiling. Rusted, but still open. At night, when the house slept, I stood on a crate and whispered into it. Not words, just sound. Rhythmic tapping. Something that maybe someone outside would hear. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pause. Repeat. My own Morse code for help me. I'm still here. Did anyone hear it? I didn't know, but I had to believe someone would. Because belief was the only thing that kept me from sinking into that concrete. One morning, I woke up to find an envelope slid through the door. No food that day. Just paper. I opened it with trembling hands. Be grateful. You have a roof. Stop making noise. You're embarrassing. No name, but I didn't need one. It was Julie's handwriting. She knew, she heard. And now I knew something too. She was afraid of being exposed. And that fear, that was my crack in the wall. If fear had started this nightmare, maybe it could end it too. Because a woman who's been buried alive doesn't beg. She waits. She watches. And when the time comes, she rises. I don't know how many days passed after that note. Time does strange things when you're forgotten. You sleep in patches. You eat in silence. You talk to yourself just to remember the shape of your own voice. But something shifted in me that day. Julie's note wasn't just cruel, it was confirmation. She was scared someone might find out. That meant she had something to lose. And I had nothing. One afternoon, I caught sight of myself in the broken shard of a mirror that had fallen behind the utility shelf. It startled me, not because I looked old, but because I looked like my mother did just before she passed. Silent, diminished, as if she'd been erased in layers. And suddenly, I heard her voice clear as day. They can take everything, child, but don't ever let them take your mind. So I began to do the one thing they didn't expect. I remembered. Every moment they wanted me to forget, I pulled it out of the shadows. The first time I held my son. The time I sold my jewelry to pay for their mortgage. The way I held Julie's hand when her mother died. My best friend gone too soon. I remembered how often I'd been the glue. And how quickly people forget glue when the house is built. But now I started writing again. With a stub of pencil I found and scraps of cardboard, I began to tell my story. Not for them. Not even for justice, but so I wouldn't disappear without anyone knowing the truth. Each night I scribbled. The lies, the bruises, the silence. And then one evening, I wrote a name I hadn't dared in months. Michael. My grandson. My sweet, soft-spoken Michael with the curious eyes and a heart bigger than his years. He was only 12 when I was taken to the guest room and never let out again. But he had asked. He had knocked. He had whispered through the door once. Grandma, why don't you come to dinner anymore? And they had pulled him away so fast, I hadn't even been able to answer. Michael was my sliver of hope. If I could get a message to him. The next night, I tore a piece of cardboard into a square. I wrote, I'm here, Michael. I've always been here. And I waited. The timing had to be right. Every Thursday, the kids were left home alone for 1 hour when Julie did yoga. I waited behind the door. At 6:27 p.m., 3 minutes before the light came on, I slid the note under the crack. Then I waited. I could hear footsteps upstairs. Small, uncertain ones. Then stillness. Then a whisper. Grandma. My breath caught in my throat. It was his voice. He had seen it. He had read it. And for the first time in months, I felt something rise in my chest that almost made me fall to my knees. Hope. Hope. Wearing a 12-year-old's sneakers. Hope. Whispering my name through the dark. And I knew then, no matter how long it took, they couldn't erase me. Not anymore. That whisper, Grandma, echoed through every corner of my soul. After months of silence, it felt like music, like sunlight cracking through a boarded-up window. I pressed my ear to the door, trembling, afraid I had imagined it. But then I heard it again, softer this time. Are you okay? I nearly broke down. Tears welled up, but I forced them back. I couldn't cry now. Not yet. I needed to stay strong for him. I knelt down, careful not to make noise, and slid another piece of cardboard under the door. Don't tell anyone you heard me. It's not safe, but I'm okay. I love you. And then I waited. For a while, nothing. Just silence. But later that night, as the footsteps and voices returned upstairs and the usual TV chatter echoed faintly through the floorboards, something soft slipped back under my door. A note, written in shaky, childlike handwriting. I knew something was wrong. I missed you. I won't tell. I'll find a way. I held that note like it was made of gold. It was the first time in months I felt like someone saw me not as a burden, not as a shadow, but as a person. Michael was still just a boy, but in that moment, he became my lifeline, my secret ally. From then on, we found ways to pass notes. He'd slip one under the door during his bathroom breaks. I'd respond with scraps of cardboard or old receipts I found in the basement. Our code grew with each passing week. Blue, safe, yellow, danger, X. Someone's coming. It was risky, but we were quiet, careful, invisible. Just like I had been trained to be. Then one day, Michael asked something that changed everything. Why are they doing this to you? I stared at the words for a long time. I had written so many truths to myself, but none to him. How do you tell a child that the people he trusts most are hurting the person he loves? How do you crush a heart that's still growing? But the truth had already begun to leak through the cracks, and I couldn't keep patching it forever. So I wrote, sometimes people hurt others because they are afraid or selfish. But none of it is your fault. Just promise me you'll stay kind. Don't become like them. The next time I got a note from Michael, it said only one thing. I won't let them win. That night I cried. But it wasn't the hollow, aching cry of despair that I had known before. It was the fierce, full-hearted sob of a woman who had just realized. I had planted something stronger than pain. I had planted resilience in the heart of a boy who would become more of a man than his father ever was. And I knew whatever happened next, I wasn't alone anymore. I couldn't stop thinking about that note. I won't let them win. It was a short sentence. Simple. Childlike. But it stirred something in me that had been buried beneath fear, humiliation, and silence hope. Michael had become my secret lifeline, my messenger of love. He was only 9, yet he carried a wisdom and quiet bravery that no one had ever taught him. Maybe it came from watching how I never screamed, never fought back, never raised my voice. Maybe he could feel the weight I carried behind my silence. Whatever it was, I realized something that day. If I wanted to get out, I couldn't do it alone. But if I could help Michael help me, if I could guide him just enough, we might stand a chance. The plan was simple, at least on paper. I began teaching him without teaching him. I'd write things like, "Do you know the emergency number just in case?" Sometimes when things feel wrong, a teacher or a friend's mom can be a safe person to talk to. I used to keep my address written in my purse in the closet, just in case someone needed to find me. These were disguised lessons. If they found the notes, it would look like Grandma was just being a sweet old lady sharing stories. But Michael understood. One day, he slipped me a note. I found the address. I memorized it. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingers. It was working. Over the next few weeks, he gave me updates without saying too much. I asked my teacher what to do if someone is being hurt. I told her my grandma went away. She asked a lot of questions. She said if I ever feel unsafe, I should come to her. Michael was lighting small matches in the dark. I just had to wait. Pray one of them would catch fire. Then one rainy afternoon, I heard it. A knock, but not at the front door. At the basement window. I froze. Had they found out? Had they caught Michael? But then I heard a woman's voice, calm, concerned, not angry. "Mrs. Ellis, are you okay? Can you nod if you can hear me?" My heart leapt into my throat. I crawled across the damp floor and peeked through the dusty window bars. It was her Michael's teacher. She had come looking. She had found me. Tears spilled before I could nod. Within an hour, there were officers, flashlights, questions, Michael crying. My son yelling, pretending to be confused, denying everything. I watched it unfold from the back of an ambulance, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, a cup of water trembling in my hands. But I wasn't trembling from fear anymore. I was trembling from the shock of being seen for the first time in months, maybe years, maybe my whole life. As they took me away, I looked back at the window, and there he was, Michael, his little hand pressed to the glass. I pressed mine back. We didn't need words. We had survived the dark together. The hospital room was quiet, but my soul wasn't. I lay in a soft bed, sunlight slipping through the blinds, my first real light in months. Nurses came and went gently, but no one asked too much. They could see the story on my face, in the bruises on my arms, in the sunken skin beneath my eyes. It took 2 days before the detectives returned. A woman, kind but firm, sat beside me. She didn't ask questions at first. She simply said, "You're safe now. And your grandson is safe too." And I sobbed. Not just for the months in the basement. Not just for the meals I never had. Not just for the bruises or the broken dignity. I cried for every year I gave them my son, my husband, my family. All of it for nothing. Once I began talking, the words wouldn't stop. I told them about the day my husband first slapped me in the kitchen and told me it was my fault the roast was dry. I told them how my son watched him and learned not love, but dominance. I told them how I raised that boy with trembling hands and stitched clothes only for him to become a man who locked his own mother below his house like a forgotten relic. And I told them about Michael, the only light in all that darkness. He saved me, I said. The detective nodded. He's a brave kid. His teacher said he asked how to call for help if someone you love is in trouble. She knew something was wrong. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I didn't even hesitate. Yes, I didn't need revenge. Not the kind that comes from seeing someone suffer the way you did. I needed truth, exposure, justice. I wanted the silence I had endured to become a voice that echoed. I was no longer protecting the people who hurt me. Days passed. I was placed temporarily in a safe house, a church-run shelter for women who'd lost their homes, their families, their voices. I was the oldest one there. And for once, it didn't make me invisible. You'd be surprised how many young women listened to an old lady like me. When I said he told me no one would believe me, they nodded with tears in their eyes. When I said I used to think I was just tired, not abused, one woman hugged me and whispered, "That was me too." Pain has a way of connecting strangers deeper than love sometimes. Michael came to visit me. His arms were full of drawings, one of me and him smiling. Above our heads were big letters, "I found you." Another showed a house, just me, in a sunny kitchen, holding a book. "This is the new house," he said proudly. "You'll get one. You'll be happy there." I couldn't speak. I could only hold him. And for the first time in my long life, I whispered a secret to a child. Not a burden, but a blessing. "You didn't just find me, Michael. You reminded me who I am. I wasn't just a grandmother. I was a survivor. And for the first time ever, I was free." You'd think that after being locked in a basement, after months of hunger, humiliation, and hopelessness, I'd want to hide from the world forever. But it was the opposite. I wanted the world to see me, not the bruised woman curled in a corner of a cement floor, but the woman who stood back up. The first morning I walked outside, I remember how the air felt on my skin. I stood in the garden behind the shelter, and the sun touched my face like a mother's hand. Birds sang. A breeze moved through the trees. The grass tickled my ankles. I stood there barefoot and whispered, "This is mine. This moment, it belongs to me." No one owned my time anymore. No one locked the door behind me. No one silenced my thoughts. The shelter's volunteers helped me find a social worker. She sat across from me one afternoon and said, "Mrs. M, you've been through more than most, but you're still standing. That's strength." I laughed gently and replied, "It's not strength. It's stubbornness mixed with a pinch of rage." She smiled. I filled out forms for housing counseling and legal aid. It was exhausting, but every signature felt like another chain breaking. Then came the day I walked into court. My husband, now ex-husband, sat across the room. My son silent beside him. Neither looked at me, and I didn't look away. I told the judge everything. My voice didn't shake. I didn't cry. I told the truth like I was reading a shopping list. He starved me. He isolated me. He beat me. He lied to everyone. And he locked me underground for months. The courtroom was still. The judge listened. My social worker held my hand. When I finished, the silence broke like a wave. They were both charged. The defense tried to say I was old, confused, depressed. They even claimed I'd locked myself in by mistake. But Michael testified. Brave little Michael standing tall in front of a courtroom full of strangers. My grandma didn't want to live down there. I heard her crying. No lawyer could fight that kind of truth. No adult could argue with that kind of love. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but from freedom. For so long, my story had been hidden in the dark. Now, it was in the open. And there's power in being seen, really seen. And do you know what the first thing I did the next morning was? I bought myself a notebook. The cover was red. The pages were clean. And on the very first line I wrote, "Dear future, I'm not done yet." They say healing isn't linear. It's true. Some mornings I'd wake up, stretch my arms in the sunlight, and feel like I could conquer the world. Other mornings I'd smell something damp, earth bleach, stale coffee, and it would send me spiraling back to that dark basement. But I never stayed in that place for long. Because I had something now that I didn't before. A life of my own. I moved into a small senior apartment complex. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No one controlled the locks. No one told me when I could eat. No one shouted my name like a weapon. I bought a soft blue armchair, the kind you sink into after a long day, and placed it by the window. That chair became my throne. From there, I wrote letters. From there, I called my sister after decades of silence. From there, I watched the sun rise and felt it was rising for me. The staff at the shelter called often just to check on me. "You're the strongest one we've ever had," one of them said. I shook my head. "I'm not strong. I'm just finally done being quiet." I joined a small support group for older women who had survived abuse. We met on Thursdays. There was always too much coffee and not enough tissues. Each of us had our story. Some worse, some quieter, all painful. But there was something beautiful about being in that room. We weren't victims anymore. We were witnesses to each other's survival. One day a little girl from down the hall knocked on my door. She held a cookie in her hand. "My mommy said you were lonely." I chuckled. "Tell your mommy I'm not lonely. I'm just peaceful now." But I invited her in anyway. Her name was Bella. She liked coloring and stories about fairies. She reminded me of Michael. I hadn't seen him in months. My son had taken him far away after the court hearings. I didn't even know where. It broke my heart. But I held on to hope. Kids remember kindness. Kids remember truth. Maybe one day he'd find me again. At night, I'd sit in my blue chair, write in my red notebook, and end each entry the same way. "You are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to become after." And slowly the fear faded. The bitterness softened. The woman in the mirror wasn't the same grandma who once whispered prayers in a basement cell. She was older, yes, but brighter. Her eyes held storms, but also light. Her voice wasn't soft anymore, it was steady. And her story wasn't over yet. I was folding laundry one afternoon. Nothing special, just the usual rhythm of life when the mail slot opened. An envelope slipped through. Thick paper. No return address. My heart tapped twice in my chest. I wiped my hands and picked it up. Inside was a note in shaky handwriting. "Grandma, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I found this address in Daddy's drawer. I hope it's yours. I miss you." Signed, Michael. My knees gave out, and I sat right there on the floor, still clutching a towel. Michael, my sweet boy. He remembered. He remembered the woman who made him pancakes in the shape of dinosaurs. He remembered the warm hugs, the lullabies, the stories. He remembered me. The next days passed in slow motion. I cleaned. I baked. I checked the hallway every hour like some lovesick teenager. Then one morning, there was a knock. Not the soft tap of the postman. A knock with urgency, with meaning. I opened the door, and there he was. Taller, his voice deeper, his face older. But those eyes still the same. "Hi, Grandma," he said, almost a whisper. I pulled him in arms, wrapping tightly around the boy I thought I'd lost forever. He didn't resist. He hugged back like he'd never let go. We sat on the couch for hours just talking. He told me what happened after I left. How his father told everyone I'd gone to a care home voluntarily. How he forbade any talk of me. But I remembered everything Michael said. Even when they tried to make me forget. He had questions. So many questions. And for the first time, I gave answers. The truth, gently but honestly. He didn't cry. He just nodded. Like he'd known all along, but finally had the words to match the memories. That evening, we walked to the little park near my building. The sun was setting. Kids were laughing. Birds were gliding overhead like brushstrokes on a warm sky. Michael turned to me and said, "I never stopped loving you, Grandma. I never will." And I realized all the pain, the silence, the basement, the betrayal. None of it had taken this moment away from me. They tried to erase me, but here I was remembered, loved, reclaimed. And I knew as we walked back hand in hand that healing didn't just belong to me now. It belonged to us. If I thought that reunion with Michael would be the end of the storm, I was wrong. It was just the beginning of something even more complicated, a reckoning. Michael started coming over more often, sneaking away on weekends and holidays. We laughed, cooked together, even started replanting my old balcony garden. But one evening, he asked a question I wasn't prepared for. "Grandma, why didn't you tell someone, the police, anyone?" I looked at him carefully. He wasn't accusing me, he was trying to understand. So I answered honestly. I was afraid of no one believing me, of being seen as dramatic, hysterical, and most of all, of losing you. His eyes softened. "But you lost me anyway." I nodded slowly. "Yes, I did." Michael didn't keep it a secret for long. Teenagers today, they carry truth in their pockets and power in their thumbs. He posted a photo of us online, captioned it, "Reunited with the bravest woman I know, my grandma. They tried to erase her. They failed." That post spread faster than I could have ever imagined. Old neighbors reached out. A few relatives, too. Some were kind. Some were shocked. And then one day, I got a call. From my daughter. "I just found out," she said flatly. "From the internet, no less." I didn't know what to say, she continued. "I didn't believe it at first. I thought maybe you'd gone crazy. But Michael told me everything." There was a long silence. Then she whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry." 3 words. But after everything I'd endured, they were still not enough. "I forgive you," I said, because I had to, for me. But forgiving someone didn't mean forgetting. Didn't mean returning to what once was. That week, my ex-husband's house, my former prison, was visited by the police. Apparently, Michael, clever as ever, had kept records. Old drawings of the basement, voice recordings of conversations. Enough to open an investigation. Enough to put my abuser on trial, if not in court, then in the eyes of everyone who once turned away. For the first time, the truth was louder than the shame. And I didn't hide. I told my story fully, publicly. Not for revenge, but for every grandmother who's ever been silenced by fear and dismissed by her own blood. And you know what? It didn't break me. It freed me. Because shame only thrives in silence. And I had finally spoken. After the dust settled and the news had faded from the screens of curious onlookers, I sat alone on my couch, watching the garden Michael and I had rebuilt begin to bloom again. Tulips. My favorite. They were always the first to bloom, even in the coldest spring. It felt symbolic, just like me. But healing isn't always graceful. Some nights, I'd still jolt awake expecting darkness chains, footsteps on the creaky stairs. Trauma has a way of planting itself deep like roots you can't fully dig up. But I no longer feared it. I faced it. Michael continued to visit me. We'd have tea talk about everything from politics to Pokemon, from music to memories. One day, he brought over a box of old family photos he'd found in his mom's attic. Ones I thought had been thrown away or burned. I held a picture of myself, young hopeful, holding my firstborn daughter in my arms. "Was she always like that?" he asked gently. I shook my head. "No, she was sweet once. Scared maybe. But the cruelty? That came later." "Do you think she knew what he did to you?" My eyes met his. She knew enough to pretend she didn't. We sat in silence for a long while. A few weeks later, I received a letter. From my ex-husband. A short typed note. "I did what I thought was right for the family. You were weak. You needed to be controlled. I don't regret it. But I won't bother you again." I stared at that letter for a long time. My hands shook not with fear but fury. Then I tore it into pieces. He didn't get to define me anymore. That was the final thread I needed to cut. It was also the first time I allowed myself to laugh freely, openly in years. I joined a local book club, started attending yoga classes for seniors, even met a group of other grandmothers who, like me, had stories buried under decades of silence. One of them told me, "You remind me of a phoenix. You were burned down, but you rose stronger." I liked that. I didn't rebuild my life with the same materials. I built it differently with boundaries, joy, truth, and the fierce knowledge of my worth. And when people ask how I survived, I tell them, because I remembered I was still a person, not a possession. Still a soul, not a shadow. And if you're listening to this now, maybe you've felt that way too. Maybe someone's tried to erase you like I was erased. Let me tell you, you can write yourself back into your own story. Because no one has the right to lock away your light. Not even family. The more I healed, the more I realized my story wasn't just mine. It was every grandmother who stayed quiet for too long. Every mother whose sacrifice was repaid with silence. Every woman told she was too emotional, too old, or too weak to fight back. I had been locked in a basement, yes. But many women live in invisible basements, trapped behind expectations, abuse, or fear of shame. And so I decided to speak. It started small. Michael convinced me to write a letter to our local newspaper. A simple op-ed titled, "I was locked in my own house by my husband, and I survived." I didn't expect much. Maybe a few readers, maybe some raised eyebrows. But the response? It was overwhelming. Letters poured in. Women I'd never met writing to say, "I thought I was alone. Thank you for saying what I couldn't. You gave me courage." Some even called. One woman sobbed on the phone for 20 minutes before whispering, "My daughter-in-law treats me like a burden. But I'm going to speak up now. Because of you." That was the moment it hit me. My pain had become purpose. I wasn't just healing, I was lighting a path. So I kept going. I started speaking at community centers, churches, senior groups, even women's shelters. My voice, once hidden in shadows, now echoed in rooms full of survivors. Each time I stood in front of a microphone, I thought of the basement. And I smiled, not out of pride, but power. Because every time I shared, I took back something that had been stolen. Michael came with me to many events. He'd hold my hand before I spoke and say, "Tell them the truth. Your truth." And I did. I told them about the quiet meals, the slammed doors, the bruises no one asked about, the grandchildren who saw me break and watched me rise. And at the end, I always ended with the same words. Don't wait to be rescued. You are not helpless. You are not invisible. You are not too late. One day, a young woman, barely 30, hugged me after a talk. She whispered, "You were locked in the basement, but you unlocked something in me." I went home that night and cried not from pain, but from freedom. The kind of freedom that only comes when truth meets courage. I no longer called myself a victim. I was a witness to what pain can do, to what silence can become, but also to what happens when a woman refuses to disappear. And in telling my story, I helped others find their own voice, a voice once locked away, now loud enough to shake walls. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd escaped that basement. 2 years of healing, speaking, rebuilding. 2 years of becoming someone I had once only dreamed of being strong, open-hearted, unafraid to take up space. Then one day a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting I hadn't seen in what felt like a lifetime. It was from him. My husband. I didn't open it at first. I stared at it for hours. The envelope burned like a ghost on my kitchen table. Part of me was curious. Another part screamed, "Don't give him your peace again." But eventually I opened it. It was only one page, a mix of shaky words and cold apologies. No emotion, no real remorse. Just facts about the divorce, about his own loneliness, about how things got out of hand. At the end, he wrote, "You must understand I didn't think it would matter. You were always quiet anyway." Those words hit harder than any slap. They reminded me why I had stayed silent for so long. Because I had been taught to. But this time I had a choice. So I took a pen and I wrote back, just one line. "I was quiet. You mistook that for weakness. You were wrong." I never sent it. I didn't need to. It wasn't for him. It was for me. For the woman who once sat in the dark and waited for someone to open the door. For the woman who now opened her own doors. Not long after I got a call from my granddaughter. She had just turned 17. "Grandma," she said, "I read your article." I shared it with my whole class. There was pride in her voice. Not pity. Not shame. Pride. They all wanted to know how you got out. I told them because she finally said enough. I cried after that call. Not because I was sad, but because I realized I hadn't just survived. I had changed the story for the next generation. You see, when I was locked in that basement, I thought my world had ended. But now I know it was only just beginning. Not all freedom comes with open doors. Sometimes it starts with a whisper, "No more." And sometimes the loudest revolution is a grandmother who refuses to be erased. I never imagined my story would matter to anyone but me. I thought it would end in the dark, forgotten, buried in a house where I was nothing but a shadow, a ghost mother, a silenced wife. But something remarkable happens when a woman, especially a grandmother, refuses to disappear quietly. The day I shared my story publicly through a local women's shelter that helped survivors speak out, I was terrified. My hands shook. I thought, what if no one believes me? What if they think I'm exaggerating? What if they call me weak? But something inside said, you've already survived the worst. You can survive this. And I did. The story spread. A quiet, stubborn story of an old woman locked in her own home, forgotten, beaten, but not broken. Women started writing to me, some in their 40s, some in their 70s. I thought I was the only one letter read. You made me believe I could leave, said another. And then came a message from a nurse. She had cared for an elderly woman who had been found in a similar situation, a woman who hadn't lived to tell her story. I thought of you, she said. You're the voice she never had. That's when I understood the true power of survival. It's not just about living through pain. It's about turning pain into light. It's about saying, you will not erase me. I exist. I endured, and now I speak. My home today is small, but it's mine. Filled with sunshine, soft chairs, books I never had time to read when I was someone else's servant. And every now and then my granddaughter visits. She always asks, Grandma, how did you know it was time to fight back? And I smile, not because I have the perfect answer, but because I lived long enough to finally hear that question. So if you're watching this, if you've been silent for years, let me say this. You are not invisible. You are not weak. You are not alone. Maybe no one ever said it to you before, but let me be the first. You matter. You are worthy of love, safety, and dignity. And you are allowed to say no. I'm just a grandmother, but I am no longer afraid of the dark because I know what it feels like to find the light again. And I want that for you too. What would you have done if you were in my place? Would you still be waiting in silence? Or would you rise? This is my story. But maybe it's your story too.